Well, hello there. And for those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Jonah Clement, and we're just going to dive right in. And today I'm going to discuss the concept of synchronicities, divine intervention, or in some cases you might call it coincidence. So first I wanted to start off by saying there is no word in Hebrew for the word coincidence. So what does that mean? Basically, it means that everything happens for a reason. Now, I'm a proponent that things just happen in life, that there's nothing good or bad that happens. It's just things happen, events happen. However, we apply meaning to them. But I also do think that God does create opportunities in a series of events for us to achieve certain goals or ends. Now, what is a synchronicity? Simply put, like I just said, it's a series of events or, in essence, divine intervention for you to reach a goal. But we can expand upon that a little bit. So it's kind of like, imagine the stars aligning or the planets aligning, not in the sense of like in a movie where it's like the 8 planets aligned or 9 or whatever. I know Pluto's not a planet anymore, but the 8 planets have aligned to where the gate to heaven is open and we all can enter through. No, it's not something like that. It's literally Source or God creating a series of events for you to achieve a subconscious or rooted desire or want or need or goal. So in essence, events present themselves in a certain fashion, or opportunities present themselves in a certain fashion, so that you can actually achieve what you're looking for. An example of this might be you're looking for a house, you're looking for a job, maybe you want to make friends, maybe you're looking to date somebody, specific things like that. And you have a deep desire for it, so God, once you ask, creates a series of events so that you can do that in alignment with Him. Now, what I want to do is actually give a couple of examples that I've experienced in my life of synchronicities, or divine intervention, or whatever you want to call it. And then I wanted to talk about a couple other examples, then we'll dive into when and how you can actually recognize synchronicities or divine intervention is actually occurring within your life. So to kick it off, I wanted to actually start with a personal anecdote of mine. So this was about 5 years ago, but basically I ended up moving in with my roommate and his girlfriend at the time. My lease at my old apartment ended, and I was living by myself for a while, which I really enjoyed, ironically, and I ended up moving up with them because I was like, oh wow, I can actually save, like $500-600 a month if I have a roommate. So funny enough, we move in, I think it was in May, I can't exactly remember, but this was a while ago. Basically, we moved in together, and within about halfway through the lease, I find out that neither my roommate nor his girlfriend can pay their half of the rent. She didn't work anymore, didn't have her job. He just had no ability to pay his rent anymore. So I'm kind of sitting there like, I don't have $2,000 to sitting around, to be covering this apartment full time. We were living in a two bedroom, two bathroom apartment, about $2,000 a month payment in Nashville. And I didn't have anywhere near that amount of disposable income to be paying $2,000 a month for a apartment. And most people are like, oh, that's such little. I'm like, in Nashville, that can be pretty expensive, especially when you're living downtown and you're literally working in an entry-level position at a company, making just enough money to basically pay rent, eat, and have a gym membership. I was not making a lot of money at that time, very entry-level position. So from that side note, so what ends up happening is I'm kind of literally freaking out. I had a conversation with my roommate and his girlfriend, and I was basically like, what do you mean you can't pay your rent? And they're like, we just can't. And at that point in time, thankfully it was at the beginning of the month, so our rent just got paid for that previous, for this upcoming month. So I basically had, in essence, about 20-30 days to figure out what the heck I was going to do. And I was in this situation where I was actually kind of panicking because I was like, wow, I went back through, read the lease agreement. It was about $5,000 cash out of pocket to break this lease. And I knew that going into it, thinking like, this is not going to happen. And then I'm at the situation where I'm like, oh, wow, I'm really screwed. So I'm basically like, well, crap. So funny enough, that next Monday I go into work and we're having a conversation with our team and whatnot. People are like, how your weekend's going and whatnot. And I happen to mention to my director at the time, like, yeah, not so great. I just found out that my roommates can't pay their rent, and I'm probably have to break my lease, which is gonna, cost me quite a bit of money. And I basically was gonna need to probably ask them for in advance my pay, and then obviously have to pay it back over time, which I really didn't want to do because that kind of puts me in the hole. So funny enough, my director at the time basically mentioned it to the owner because she was like, where do you live again? And I told her, and funny enough, the owners of the apartment complex that I was staying at actually, one had stake in the company that I currently was working for, so they owned some of the shares, a very large portion of these shares. And second, they're actually really good friends with one of the owners of the company. So ironically, I ended up just happenstance mentioning to my director, who then passed this along to my owner of the company. I ended up, not my owner, the owner of the company. The owner of the company, and I ended up having a conversation with him and telling the situation. He ended up saying, yeah, don't worry about it. We're going to figure this out. He literally reached out to the owner of the apartment complex and told him my situation, my story of what was going on. And basically, like, he's right out of college. He's just getting started off. Like, this is not something that's good for him. He was obviously willing to, this is not, in essence, his fault. He's willing to pay his rent, keep with it. Is there anything we can work out? So funny enough, they basically offered me the opportunity to not worry about the, breaking the lease or the current contract that I was under. The only thing that I had to fill was moving into a new unit of their apartment complex. So I agreed to that. I ended up getting a single, one bedroom, one bathroom place at that apartment complex without having to worry about the current lease or breaking the lease or anything, and that basically became null and void. I got to move in at a lower rate than what I was currently paying for my rent anyway, which was great. And on top of that, I didn't have to worry about having some, thing damaging my credit score or, having some weird thing for, in the future relating to housing. So thankfully, through a series of events, in essence, I had no idea at the time, though, when I moved in to that apartment, that was literally owned by one of the friends of the people I work for. So I was like incredibly grateful to God, because this honestly presented itself literally from just having a conversation and just literally mentioning to somebody that I work, like literally mentioning to my boss at the time. And this literally was fantastic, positive outcome. Basically just didn't really had not like a falling out with the people that I was living with at the time, but it was just kind of like we had nothing to talk about. So that was the first example that I wanted to give, just because it was so surreal, to tell you the truth, that it happened, because I was like, wow, it literally felt like God, universe, source was really looking after me at that time, because I literally didn't have the resources to take care of that situation, other than like I had a good network, and that kind of took care of itself, and I didn't have to worry about anything through any of that. And it was awesome. It was honestly, my mind was blown. I was taken aback by it. I felt so loved at that time. Like literally, I felt like I was taken care of and protected. And I knew that was, in essence, like a divine intervention or a synchronicity, because everything kind of just worked itself out. And on top of that, I was right before that, I kind of wanted to get out of that lease anyway with my previous roommate, because I just didn't. There was kind of, it was my friend at the time too, my roommate, and it was just a lot of differences occurred, and we basically kind of were at this point where we're going separate ways in our life, and that kind of just happened in a sense where it did occur, and I didn't have to worry about it happening. It just kind of happened naturally, in a weird way, but it still happened. So the next story that I wanted to mention, a personal anecdote, was actually how I ended up finding my home that I currently live in. And this was actually about a year and a half ago. I was basically back in 2020, during the pandemic, I got the opportunity to move home back to Florida. I was living currently in Nashville, Tennessee at the time. Due to COVID, everybody at my company was working remote. So basically, I took that opportunity because a lot of people already at the company were, actually moving out of state because we were on a full-time remote schedule. So at that point in time, I basically asked my manager, hey, I really want to move back to Florida. Half of it was because I wanted to kind of move back in with my dad to get a chance to save some money, or finish saving money to actually buy a home and put a down payment on it. And the second reason was I was kind of just I didn't really want to live in Nashville anymore. Florida always kind of felt like home. Between you and me, I didn't really like the cold, but I also was just I wasn't really wanting to live in Nashville anymore. And I kind of wanted to just kind of move back home for a bit. So funny enough, I ended up calling my dad after I technically got the approval to be able to move remote, or had that first conversation. He basically at the time was kind of I don't know if that's a good idea, if moving back home's probably the smart thing to do. Funny enough, a week later, he literally calls me back and says, hey, I thought about what you said and about the concept of saving money for a home, especially right now, since the housing market's actually towards the end of 2020 was great, really low interest rates. So they said, yeah. But the only caveat is that you need to buy a home within a year of you moving in with me. So I understood that clearly, and so I moved back home. So about 10 months go by. I have plenty of money saved up to put a down payment on a home and all the closing costs and everything. And even have a little money left over to, get some nice furniture for when I first moved in and whatnot. So I'm at home trying to look for, houses and whatnot. And I had a very specific area in northern Florida. I was looking at specifically Ocala at the time, and I wasn't finding anything within my price range that I actually liked or any neighborhood that I really wanted to live in. Everything was kind of like, it was not really what I was looking for. And funny enough, I had a very specific image of what I wanted in my mind. I was like, I want an open floor plan. I wanted a nice kitchen. I was specifically, I wanted an island in the kitchen. I wanted everything to either be tile or hardwood. I had no interest in living in a house that had any carpet in it. I honestly have I extreme dislike for carpet. I have a dog, so it doesn't work well. I wanted a back porch and then a big backyard. And a garage. Those are really all my asks. Everything else I was kind of like, I can work with. So funny enough, within a couple of days of me kind of really putting that like in my mind of like, this is what I'm looking for. I ended up having this dream, and it's like literally this house within my mind kind of presents itself like exactly what I'm looking for. It's like literally the exact house that I want. So funny enough, a couple of days later, I ended up going on Zillow, finding a realtor to kind of help me look. So I ended up kind of still looking in Ocala, and then my dad kind of mentioned to me, hey, why don't we stop looking in Ocala? Why don't we look in a different city? So then I kind of moved, I transitioned to looking at a different city, a little bit further north, and we start kind of looking around. So funny enough, one day we decided to make a trip out there because my realtor at the time had a few houses to show me because I kind of gave her what I was looking for and my price range. And she's like, all right, we have 3 houses that we can look at. So funny enough, we ended up going to, the city we're looking at. And first house we go to, we physically cannot get in, like at all. It's like it was a coded door thing, and the code that they provided was not working, so we had no ability to get in the home. Which was kind of funny, because I'm literally sitting there like, well, I looked at it the window, I'm like, this looks pretty cool. Had all hardwood floors, I kind of saw pictures of the house, had the kitchen I wanted and everything, but we could not get it. So that house is already scratched off, because I'm like, obviously I'm not going to buy a house I can't see. I'm just not the type of person. Here we're going to another house, second house, and we get in, and I'm like, okay, this is okay. I wasn't a big fan of it. It was fine. I mean, it met some of the parameters of what I wanted, but not everything. So then we end up going to the third house. And I guess third time's the charm for most things, because it was in this case. We end up going in, and it's literally almost verbatim what I dreamed about. It was the funniest thing, because we pulled up to this house, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, this is strange. This looks like pretty much exactly what I was dreaming about a few days prior. And I don't know, I don't expect all of you to believe me, but I was literally sitting there I was literally breathless at that point in time. I was like, wow, this is kind of surreal what's going on. So we end up going into the house. It has everything I want. Open floor plan. It had tile. It had this wood tile flooring to where it's the tile flooring that looks like wood planks. It's open kitchen. You could tell they renovated everything. It was freshly renovated. It had a back porch, had a big backyard, had a garage. It was in a nice neighborhood. Additionally, there was no HOA, which was even better. So I was sitting there wow, this is awesome. And it was within my price range. Within, not even on the higher end. It was right in the middle of my price range. So when I left that house, I was like, this is what I want. This is literally the house that I'm going to live in. So within a week, so the next day, I instantly put in an offer. And then within a week, they accept the offer, and we start the process of closing and whatnot, and then a month later, I own the house. And funny enough, it wasn't for the fact that my dad mentioned, why don't we start looking in a different city, because obviously Ocala is not working out in your price range, and B, if honestly it wasn't for, I guess, the intent of knowing what I wanted and having that dream of it, literally, if it wasn't, I don't think if it wasn't for that dream, I would have been that, it felt like it presented itself. It literally felt like this house created itself it was created for me in essence, because it was exactly what I was looking for. And there's some other things that I'm not going to dive into that was even, an addition on the house that I really liked, but it was crazy. I was thank you. I was so grateful at that time, getting to move in the first day and just being wow, I achieved one of my dreams of finally buying a home. I got to do it in my 20s, which was super exciting. I'm 28, so I was really, really excited that I was able to buy a house at 26. So it was awesome. I was like really, really excited about that. Extremely grateful to God. And it just seems like these synchronicities or events or opportunities kind of presented themselves in such a weird way that it just played out. So those are my two personal anecdotes. I wanted to dive into one more story really quickly. So this is actually from the Bible, the story of Joseph. I'm going to run through this really fast. So basically, Joseph gets sold into slavery by his older brothers, basically because they're jealous of the guy. Because his dad ends up giving him this really nice coat and just kind of shows him more love than the rest of his brothers at the time. So they end up selling him to slavery in Egypt. So he ends up going to work for this. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but he basically works for this very important man in Egypt. I'm just going to call him an aristocrat. Basically works for this aristocrat in in Egypt. And what ends up happening is he's so good at his job because basically head of the house, runs everything for this household and whatnot. Eventually, the wife of his owner basically comes on to Joseph. Joseph's not about that. He's like, no, I'm not doing this. It's just not right. Funny enough, she ends up going to her husband, telling him that basically Joseph came onto her and, forced himself onto her. Joseph ends up running away because he hears about it. He gets caught, thrown into prison, and he's in prison for a few years. What ends up happening is there's two people from the Pharaoh's royal staff that ends up getting thrown in prison as well. One's a royal guard, the other's a royal chef. The royal guard ends up having this dream. Joseph, and somehow Joseph basically interprets this dream for the royal guard and basically tells them that you're going to end up dying. And you might correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't remember everything in that story correctly. I just remember he meets two people. And they were related to the Pharaoh, or not related, they were part of the Pharaoh's staff. So basically, the guard dies. But the guard, before he dies, ends up introducing him to the royal chef that's also in prison. Joseph interprets the royal chef's dream and basically tells him that, you'll be forgiven and Pharaoh will take you back as the chef. So Joseph, royal chef gets taken back to the Pharaoh and starts working with the Pharaoh again. Joseph's still in prison. And all the guards actually love him. A lot of the prisoners love him at this time too, just because he's just such a lovable person. Basically, Pharaoh ends up having a dream as well. And nobody can interpret it. None of his advisors, none of his priests, none of his staff are able to interpret his dream. And he basically keeps on having this dream, and it's like, I don't know what it means. Funny enough, the royal chef mentions to Pharaoh that Joseph actually interpreted his dream for him. So then Pharaoh's like, go get him. So Joseph gets brought before the Pharaoh. Pharaoh tells him his dream. Joseph basically explains to him that Egypt's going to have 7 years of bountifulness, fruitfulness, and prosperity, and then followed by 7 years of drought, famine, and whatnot. And that the first 7 years should really be used as a way to stockpile resources and whatnot for the following 7 years when they're not going to have really any harvest. So from this interpretation, Pharaoh literally puts Joseph in charge of everything. He becomes governor of Egypt, and he basically gains the title, I believe one of them is father of Pharaoh, and he basically becomes the head advisor of the Pharaoh. And this is amazing because the only person that Joseph reported to literally was Pharaoh. That was it. And none of these opportunities that opportunity never would have happened if it wasn't for the fact that he got sold into slavery. He got thrown into prison, and he ended up meeting the right person at the right time that introduced him literally to the most powerful person in that state. So, funny enough, from that, Joseph is able to bring his people. He ends up having a happenstance meeting with some of his older brothers. They don't recognize him, but he recognizes them instantly. Ends up having a couple of, happenstance events with a couple of his brothers, and he's able to actually ask Pharaoh to allow the Hebrew people at the time to move to Egypt and have land of their own to be able to live in Egypt and be protected. And if it wasn't for all of these, what would be considered by most people's standards, like being sold into slavery and being thrown in prison, all this stuff are bad events. If it wasn't for these really just events happening, none of this would have occurred. So I want to leave you with those three stories. Now I wanted to transition really quick into how do you know if synchronicities or divine intervention is occurring. First off, it's you might not notice when it's happening. For me, a lot of it was like retrospect after the fact. But if you're aware of what's going on and you have awareness within you, like a strong sense of awareness, you might start to notice things. You might notice events start happening that kind of seem surreal, or wow, that was weird that I met somebody that I didn't think I was going to meet. Or one example might be let's say you have a interest in somebody at your gym, or an interest in somebody, maybe just an interest in somebody that you see regularly. And you see them at the gym and you never really have the opportunity to talk with them or whatnot, and then all of a sudden, like the next day, you run into them at the grocery store and you're able to start a conversation because you go to the same room. It's like, oh, I see you at the gym all the time or whatnot. So that's an example of it. So if you just kind of see a correlation of events start to occur and you have a certain desire and that correlates to that, that most likely means that synchronicities are occurring or divine help is happening. So another way is, I'm going to mention numerology real quick. So before I lose some people, I'm not going to be talking about the woo-woo numerology, all like numbers mean certain things. No. But I will say the universe runs on patterns and math for the most part. At least the universe we see in front of us. And the concept of repeating numbers like 111, 222, 333, 777, things like that is interesting because that is very unique and rare in nature. You don't usually see repeating numbers out in the world very often. Maybe 2, but never 3 or 4. It's very rare that you'll actually see that. And once you're aware of that, you'll start to see it more and more, which is kind of funny how that works. But basically what that is it's a way that our mind is able to project out to the world in front of us that you're A, on the right path, B, that God is working in your life in some fashion. You might not know what it is, but he is there working on something with you. And C, it's just a constant reminder that, hey, events are happening, and opportunities are occurring. You might want to look around and see what there is. Now, I'm not going to dive into all the crap of like, certain number sequences mean certain things. I literally when I used to say like 111 or like 222, I literally sit there and Google on my phone like, oh, what does this mean? And then you get like 1,000 different answers of like what 222 means. And it's like, well, that's not helpful. Everybody's saying something different. And some of it's even contradictory. So basically what I take it as is that if you see repeating numbers, and this might not be for everybody, but I would say if you actually start seeing patterns like that, there's a reason why you're seeing it. Literally, it just means you're on the right path and that God's working in your life. And he's going to, create opportunities or events for you. And those are, I would say, the two. The numerology one I want to dive into in another video and give a little bit more explanation on. I just kind of wanted to mention that real quick because I do use that actually in my life and have a, belief about like that, since it is a rare occurrence, that you actually will see those things. However, I just wanted to mention those as kind of like last minute items for you to recognize synchronicities or divine intervention in your life. So with that, I wanted to say thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Otherwise, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.